Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar on how the Research and Development Tax Credit works within fertility and reproductive medicine industries. We're super excited to have you all. Look forward to providing you with some information about the credit, how it can apply directly to your organizations. Feel free to ask any questions along the way, but we will be doing a Q&A towards the end of the webinar, which is where we're going to be addressing most of the questions that pop up before then. But so as an introduction, my name is Stephen Latchin. I'm actually one of our research and development tax credit consultants here at Leyton. I'm based in the San Francisco office, but since joining the Leyton team in 2020, most of my experience here has been spent working with a variety of different companies in the medical space, many of which are smaller private medical practices that are really keeping themselves afloat. But at Leyton, my primary focus is to work with our clients to help them understand the credit, confirm which projects that they're working on that we will want to take a look at, as well as providing any additional context surrounding the credit that they will find helpful. Joining me today is David DeVore, who is one of our technical consultants with tons of experience working within this space. David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So like Stephen said, my name is David DeVore. I work within the biotechnology consultants here at Leyton. My background is primarily in molecular biology and drug discovery. I worked on some drugs that targeted various G protein coupled receptors, including one of them being the GnRHR receptor, which is pretty relevant to reproductive endocrinology.
Awesome. Well, let's get started. So as mentioned in the title of the webinar, today's focus is solely on how the R&D tax credit applies to the fertility and reproductive medicine industries. First, I'm going to give you a high-level overview around the credit. I'm going to provide some history behind it, its primary objective, and how it can help your business. I will also cover some of the trends that we're seeing in the industry that are really important to keep in mind as you think of to yourself how this credit could apply to you directly. From there, David will walk you through how the IRS defines research and development through the 4-part test, which essentially just determines whether or not a project would be eligible for consideration of the credit. He will then move on to the primary qualifying expenses that would be included into the calculation of your credit once we review them to confirm eligibility. He'll also discuss what this actually is going to mean for you and how it's going to coalesce into a credit that's really just going to lower your taxes. And then from there, we'll both provide a few general examples of R&D that we're constantly seeing in the fertility space, a few specific examples that should help make this seem a little bit more relatable to you. And we'll also cover what our process looks like before answering any questions that you might have. But the R&D, the Research and Development Tax Credit is a federal incentive program that provides a dollar-for-dollar tax credit for any process or product improvements that might be developed at any point in time in the United States. To give you some background about how the credit was created is really it was created in the 1980s. It's been around for quite a while. And the goal of it was just to bolster US investment into the hard sciences to help incentivize innovation that would help the economy and provide value to the US and beyond. In its original format, there were some limitations and uncertainty surrounding the credit that prevented many organizations from going through the process to take advantage of it, while it was also had to be renewed every 2 years. So many organizations weren't entirely sure on whether or not this remained a possibility for them to include within their tax strategy over the years, which prevented them from maybe wanting to take advantage of it throughout the long haul. But in 2015, the PATH Act was passed, which really not only made the R&D credit permanent, but also added a few additional elements to it. The most important one being that companies can now reduce their payroll taxes as a substitution to their income tax liability, which really is helpful for companies that haven't quite gotten to the point yet where they're paying income taxes, but are still putting a lot of money into research and development. But what does this mean for your business? The most obvious and clear outcome is there is an immediate reduction in your tax liability. And that is really independent of whether you're choosing to reduce your payroll or income tax liability. But these credits can be kept for up to 20 years into the future, which is helpful. Again, if you are a younger company that has been investing heavily in R&D, but don't necessarily have a very large tax liability at this point in time, but you're expecting that you will over the next few years. And since we are able to look back and amend your 3 most previous tax returns, in many cases, you do have the ability to receive a cash payment for any of the credits that you weren't taking advantage of within those 3 years, which comes to you in the form of a check straight from the IRS. But at the end of the day, the R&D credit puts more cash into your pocket to invest back into your practice so that you can continue to have the financial freedom to keep developing, keep staying up to date on the cutting edge technology through new techniques, procedures, or any other process improvements that are going to benefit you or your customers or your patients. But before we discuss the credit any further, I think it's really important to first understand some of the trends that we're constantly seeing in this industry, considering they do have a lot to do with the credit and how they could potentially apply to you. First off, infertility is on the rise in the United States, as 1 in 8 couples are affected by it due to economic and social reasons that are becoming more and more difficult to understand and predict. With that being said, as more people turn to assisted reproduction therapies, it's important that the industry keeps up to maintain a level of care and high success rates so that public confidence remains high without compromising the safety of the patient. Recent studies have even suggested that 9 out of 10 infertility cases can be solved through these programs, with the expectation that the number can potentially grow as new technology develops over time. And we've seen this in action. The last couple decades have shown that advances in reproductive medicine, developmental biology, and other industry-related fields have actually increased success rates that patients are seeing, which is really just increasing demand for these services as more and more Americans are turning to them for their reproductive goals. But to summarize, as assisted reproduction therapies are becoming more and more popular, new techniques and technologies are constantly being added to the table to ensure patients are successful and happy with the services that are helping them start their families. And as I pass it over to David, he will discuss how many of these advancements can provide a tax benefit to you through the R&D tax credit, as well as some of the examples that we're seeing which are commonplace today.
Yep. So first we have to determine what R&D is. I know, coming from a scientific lab and academic background, what I define as R&D is quite different than what the IRS defines as R&D. So the IRS has set out this 4-part test, which is pretty broad compared to the usual academic, science, and industry background, where you have to publish for it to be R&D. The IRS definitely doesn't look for publications. What they're looking for is to meet this 4-part test, which starts with technological in nature. And all that means is that the project has to be based in the hard sciences. It has to be in the pursuit of a new or improved product, process, technique, or formula. There has to be some form of uncertainty, and that uncertainty must be eliminated through a process of experimentation where alternatives are evaluated. So as you can see, that test is pretty broad in comparison to a lot of the work that's being done in ART and IVF. So then the question becomes, what can be claimed? So once we have a qualified project, we can look at 4 qualifying cost categories. The first of those is salaries of those directly involved in an R&D project. And then we can actually also qualify those directly supporting and those directly supervising any R&D activity. We can also look to include eligible subcontractors and 1099s that have to be claimed at 65%. And then we can also include raw materials and supplies that are used to conduct the research, as well as computers externally leased for the conducting of research. So that would be a lot of bioinformatics software. If you were to happen to be doing large-scale data analysis, we could look to include some of that computing cost. So then the ultimate question is, how can this benefit you? How can you benefit from the R&D tax credit? So there's 2 real ways. And the ultimate answer is, if you're paying income or payroll tax, then you can benefit from this credit. Using the income tax variety of this credit, you can directly reduce your income tax liability on a dollar for dollar basis of both your federal and potentially your state tax liability. This can be claimed in the current tax year, and it can also be claimed retroactively for the 3 prior years. And then when you use that retroactive claim, the tax liability offset by the credit is directly refunded on overpaid historical taxes. And then let's say that you aren't yet profitable, but you're looking to be, we can potentially utilize the payroll tax benefit. This is a federal incentive for startup and younger companies that reduces payroll tax liability again on a dollar for dollar basis. There's some stipulations to the payroll tax credit in that it can only be claimed in the current tax year for a maximum of 5 years. And you cannot have revenue more than $5 million for the current tax year, and you can't have any revenue in the preceding 5-year period, in addition to a limit of $250,000 annually. So as you can see, there's 2 ways that we can potentially utilize the credit, even if you have tax liability in the current year or not. So then it's important to discuss just some areas that we've seen R&D in fertility and reproductive medicine. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of new publications coming out each year. And I'm sure with the onset of coronavirus, there's going to be a lot more long-term studies to see its effect on reproduction. But these are just some areas that we've seen in our personal work of where that research is happening. So we found that a lot of companies are testing newer improved sperm separation techniques, oocyte aspiration techniques, and embryo transfer techniques. We found that a lot of companies are developing new culturing systems. Dry and humidified environments, I know, are a big controversy about which one's better. We've noticed a lot of stimulation cycle protocol development. Obviously, antagonist and agonist protocols have been on the rise, as well as natural and mini IVF cycles. And then there's a lot of research going into predictive testing to figure out exactly what parameters you can look at to predict successful reproductive outcomes. We found a lot of development in existing drugs used in an off-label manner. And then we've also found some new techniques for oocyte retrieval that look to improve implantation and singleton birth rates. So then we just compiled a few case studies just so that way we can really show you how lucrative this credit can potentially be. The first case study is a relatively larger company with over 200 employees. We found that across those 200 employees, there was an average time spent on research and development of about 10%, with a minima at 5% and a maximum at 90% for the more R&D related individuals like the endocrinologists and embryologists. Some of the work that they were doing was in oocyte, sperm, and zygote preservation techniques, basically vitrification. We found that they were trying to optimize their culture conditions, improve blastocyst conversion, and then they were also looking at enhancing their protocols to decrease twin pregnancy rates. So we found with that 10% average qualified time, we also found an average qualified supply cost of 5%, with some departments being up to 100% of their supplies were involved in the research. Using that information, we were able to find them over $250,000 in tax credit. And going retroactively into the 3-year period, that equated to over $750,000 in income tax liability reduction. Then we just have another case study here of a smaller firm. Again, they were involved in vitrification improvements, embryo quality, predictive factors, a lot of mitochondrial DNA assays, AMH assays, stuff like that, mini IVF protocol development, and then new AZH techniques. This company had 21 employees. They had an average time spent of 35% on the R&D, with 25% being the minima and 85% being the maximum, again, for those embryologists, endocrinologists, and some of the more research-focused clinicians. We found an average supply qualification of 40% for this particular company, which netted about $65,000 in income tax reduction, which over the 3-year retroactive period equated to over $215,000 in tax credit, which again reduces your income tax liability on a dollar for dollar basis.
All right, well, let's walk through the process. So the latent process is very thorough, and we make absolute sure that we definitely process everything correctly so that the least amount of work is required on your end to start taking advantage of the credit. The key thing to keep in mind is that while you will have, of course, a tax professional on hand to work with you throughout the process, we uniquely pair you with an actual technical expert such as David with experience in your industry so that we can speak your language and understand everything that you're doing at a very in-depth technical level. To kick things off, we first begin with the initial assessment for you to meet the consultants that you'll be working with, as well as further discuss any projects that you're working on that we will want to include within the credit. From here, we can set expectations on the delivery of your final report, establish a timeline on the subsequent tasks that we will need to complete before doing so. Before we begin creating the final report, however, we first will need to collect some basic documentation and specifics surrounding the R&D that you're doing, which can generally be understood after a couple discussions with some of the personnel that you have that are actually doing the R&D before we begin writing the report. And in that report, we outline everything that you're doing that's considered research and development, why it qualifies, and why we attached the specific dollar amounts that we did to ensure that we are as absolutely precise as possible when calculating the credit. Once you receive the report, you simply file it with the IRS to instantly receive that dollar for dollar credit towards either your income or your payroll taxes. So we do our very best to make sure that our process takes the least amount of time away from you as possible, as we understand that you're probably very busy, but usually we need just a few hours of your time spread out across a few weeks before having that information that we need to accurately build a report that enables you to save potentially tens of thousands of dollars every year in taxes, with the potential of seeing a look back through the IRS. And our ability to optimize your time while delivering results, I think it speaks volumes to who we are as a company. Since our founding, we've worked with over 24,000 organizations across the world as we focus primarily on the research and development tax credit. In the United States, this is the one and only service that we provide, which enables us to specialize in all of these different areas that are often overlooked within the tax consulting industry so that we can provide the greatest possible outcome to all of our clients. But whether you're based in the US or if you're abroad, have offices in multiple countries, most countries in the West do have some iteration of this credit. So regardless, we'll be able to pair you with specialists with experience in your field, as well as knowing the local tax laws so we can help you take advantage of this wonderful tax credit that allows you to save money and reinvest it back into your business. So I think we should do a Q&A if we have any questions here. I think now would be a good time for David and I to potentially help you out and answer any questions that might come up. Okay, so the first question, David, which I'll let you answer. What are the most common procedures that we find in this field that are going to be included within the credit?
Right. So there's really two aspects that we look to, or that we usually see. One is the lab space, and the second is the clinical. So within the lab processes, we usually see things revolving around microfluidics. Microfluidics is a brand new scientific technique that's being used in sperm separation. I know that a lot of external companies are making new products to really enhance sperm separation to find and separate out viable sperm cells. So we see a lot with sperm separation techniques, and we also see a lot with culturing. So culturing embryos and oocytes is essential to IVF and other assisted reproductive technologies. So we see a lot in the optimization of those culturing techniques. And then on the clinical side, where we see it is often in the transfer of embryos, where there'll be different minimally invasive transfer techniques And then we'll also see it a lot in finding predictive factors. So a lot of times it's very difficult to see, uh, to really measure how effective a procedure will be on reproductive outcomes. So we're seeing a lot with the investigation of different predictive measures to really find out what is important to look for and what is not important to look for to really predict those outcomes.
Awesome. The next question, will I get audited? I think I can answer this question. So basically the chance of an audit through the R&D tax credit, it's fairly low. The IRS considers it a tier 2 audit poll, which means that you're looking at roughly a 3% chance of that happening, of an audit happening if you are utilizing the credit. Luckily, the way that we build out the report, since it is so thorough and it does accurately convey everything that you're doing at a very in-depth level and answers all the questions that the IRS is ultimately going to ask anyway, even if that does happen, which again, it's still a fairly low chance of it happening, there will be no question about everything that you're doing and why you actually included the credit within your tax filing. Any additional questions? Going once, going twice. Okay, so if there are no more questions, we'll wrap it up. Thanks everybody for joining. Really appreciate you spending your time learning more about the credit with us. I guess to summarize, I mean, it's a great opportunity for you to get some tax money back from the government, particularly because it does allow you to put that money back into your practice, so that you can continue utilizing these new technologies, new procedures that are constantly being made available through time, just to make to allow you to help growing and become as innovative as possible. But that's it. Feel free to contact us if anything comes up, if you have any additional questions that we didn't cover something exactly, anything regarding eligibility, how much you might be able to get back, how the IRS defines research and development, which again is a little bit different than I think most people in the medical community are used to. Feel free to contact us at any time and we'll gladly set up a conversation to help answer any of those questions that you might have. That's it. Feel free to contact us and we look forward to hearing back from you.